Hi everyone, Barbara Rankin here with another video tutorial for ColourArte. Today I want to share this sweet In the Pink mixed media canvas. I used 5 different colors of pink primary elements powdered pigments for the background, some molded embellishments, thumbtacks from my desk, and lots of flowers. So grab a cuppa and let's get started. I've got an 8 by 10 canvas here. I like that size because it's not too big. And I'm still trying to use up my supply of thumbtacks. So I spaced them evenly along the edge, and I used a rubber mallet to hammer them in. Now I want to cover the thumbtacks partially with a thick and thin coat of Crackle paste. I will do this first before anything else because Crackle paste always works best if left to dry on its own. Trying to speed up the drying time usually results in no results at all. So I'll leave this to set overnight and be back in the morning. Anyway, I will speed up the video for this portion. I had a little bit of Crackle paste left in my jar, so I added it to the sides of the canvas, and what was left I spread in the center. A few days have passed, and here is a close-up of all the crackly goodness and texture. I had a few pieces of paperclay molded pieces in my stash and thought they would make more great texture for my background. You've seen me use this technique before. I first laid the pieces out to see how they look. If you want smaller pieces, the paperclay tears quite easily. Then I used tacky glue to adhere them and placed some weights to hold them down while the glue dried. Next, I'm adding a light coat of white gesso to the background. This will help prime all the different surfaces and keep the paperclay from absorbing the paint like a sponge. Using almost a dry brush over the crackled areas will prevent filling in the cracks with the gesso. And don't forget to do the sides too. Now I'm looking through some of my pre-molded pieces for a focal image. I'm just trying some out to see what I like, and then gluing these 2 pieces I've chosen so far with the Fast Grab tacky glue. I decided that I need to use up some of my paper flowers and leaves. So once again, I am laying some out to see what I like, and then changing my mind to go in the opposite direction. I'm not being careful about the color either because I am going to gesso everything. I'm using 3D gloss gel to glue my flowers in place. I started out using a spatula, but I found that using my finger to add the gel medium was quicker and easier. Now, the reason I chose this gel medium is because it will dry 3D, which is what I needed to do to have my flowers sitting up off of each other, sort of like using pop dots without the aggravation. And I think any heavy-bodied gel medium would also work. Now, like I said before, I don't care what color I'm using. What I'm really looking for is size and shape, particularly placing the larger flowers on the bottom and then the slightly smaller ones on top, sort of like layering them so you can still see some of the flowers on the bottom. Then I found this bag of really tiny flowers. They are so small I had to use a cheap, stiff brush to add the gel medium to them. Now I wasn't sure where I was going with this, but then I saw the nest and tiny baby bird I had previously molded, and it fit perfectly on top of the frame. This is where the 3D gel comes in really handy because you can gob it onto the back of these pieces that are usually uneven and sometimes concave, and still ensure contact with the canvas. And lastly, I'm going to glue down Mama Bird with the 3D gel. She will fit nicely perched on top of the frame to keep watch over her baby. Now it's time to add the coat of gesso to all of the new additions to the canvas. I'm using an almost dry brush to paint the flowers and leaves, even though it means I will have to go over it a few times. Otherwise, if you try to put too much gesso on the flowers, it tends to glue the petals together, and then you will lose that dimension we worked so hard to achieve. And don't worry about covering them to the point that they are completely white either. By the time we finish adding all of our color layers, it will cover the flowers as well. And cover the molded pieces as well to ensure they are primed nicely for the next layer. Okay, it's time to start coloring. That's the fun part. And I have a selection of pinks here from ColourArte. These are all primary elements, the powdered pigments. And the first one is rose gold. I'm going to go ahead and open them up and sit them next to my paper here that lists them. This is Hopeful Honeysuckle. I need to open that one up. And you can see the difference in the colors here. This is Rose Petal. I have Apple Blossom. And the last one is Playful Peony. And I'll just set those aside right there. Okay. So you can get an idea of the different colorations these have. Now let's get started. I'm just going to take a soft brush like this fan brush to sprinkle the powder around. This is Playful Peony. You can also brush it around if you prefer, or if you just want to spread a dense area of the powder. It won't matter at this point because the powder is still dry. And remember, these do not have any binder in them. And what a binder is, it's some medium that allows your pigment to stick to your project. Think of it like a glue. A binder can be gum arabic, acrylic mediums like gel mediums or molding paste, and you can even add them to acrylic paint because acrylic paint already has its own binder. ColourArte also carries acrylic glaze medium to turn your pigments into an acrylic paint, or the solution, which will produce a watercolor paint. I'll post a link to these two products below the video. Now, if you only use water to spread these pigments, you will need to seal your project with some sort of fixative, whether it is a workable fixative or a clear sealer or varnish. I prefer to use a spray type product since anything you brush onto the surface will mix up the colors. I started to get impatient to put color down faster, so after spreading what I already had on the canvas with my wet brush, I started picking up the colors right from the jar and painting patches of color around the outside areas of the canvas, and blending them into each other as I added them. I almost forgot about the sides of my canvas, so I picked up the same colors I used on top to paint the edges and to carry that background color around to the back. The paint was almost dry by the time I finished up painting the sides, but I used my heat tool to speed up the drying time. Next, I'm going to use Mandarin Citrine with a small flat brush to color the flowers. I'll be dipping it in my water and picking up the pigment directly from the jar, using the water to help spread the pigments easily over the flowers, and a little bit more water to let it run between the flowers. While the flowers are drying, I'm going to use the Fern primary elements to color the leaves, picking up the flowers that overhang onto the leaves to get that color underneath. And now adding Playful Peony over the top of the flowers will give it that gorgeous coloration. If the color is too intense, you can add water, or if it's not intense enough, you can add more pigment. Next, I'm going to use Nutty Oak Primary Elements to paint the frame. I'm just going to pick up any flowers that hang over it to get that color down in the nooks. I'll go back and forth between adding water or adding more pigment until I get the color the way I want it. I'm also painting the horizontal resin embellishment with the same color. I'm going to paint the birds with Bolivian Blue Primary Elements. And starting with the baby bird, I'm getting a pretty dark coat down because I'm using less water and more pigment while trying not to make a runny color that will fill up the frame opening. It's such a tight space, I know it will be hard to pick up the blue color, and I want to keep that pink background if possible. However, I know I'll be able to remove some of the pigment later, and I can paint the mama bird with less pigment because it will be easier to dab up any of the excess color that may drip around her. When I finish painting both, I'll be using a damp brush to remove some of the color, sort of like reverse painting. I'll do this by dipping my brush into the water and drying the brush a bit on a paper towel. Then I'll run the brush over the area or areas where I want it to be lighter. You will see on the baby bird that I need to remove a lot of color from the body. And then I removed quite a lot of color on the baby's breast to achieve a light blue, almost white color. I will continue the same way to remove the color or colors from the mama bird. Remember, this is possible because there is no binder in the pigments and they are not sticking to the surface yet. And while I had the blue out, I thought it would be a good time to add some dimension and shading to the leaves. I'm using burnt umber primary elements to paint the bird nest. Again, I'm going to be using as little water as possible to keep from getting my paint mix too runny and having it run all over the lighter colors that I've already applied. I'm going to use Playful Peony to paint inside the baby bird's tiny mouth. It will be easier to mix the powder with water on my craft mat first and obtain that just right consistency that I'll need to get into that tight little space. I'm painting the outside of their mouths with a mixture of the mandarin citrine and water. And now I'm just going back and forth with the colors to touch up the beak as needed. I added a bit of burnt umber to the mandarin citrine to make a darker shade, and then I painted their feet with it. I also used it to darken the eyes just a bit. Next, I used a black Sharpie marker to add some detail to the eyes. Now I'm going to use a white paint marker to add that glint to the bird's eyes. I have a metal paper piercer tool handy, so I will use that to pick up a tiny dab of the white and add it to each eye. This is that tiny detail that adds life to the images. Right now I'm happy with my colors, so I'm going to use a spray sealer on my canvas to keep my pigments from rubbing off. That way, if I decide to add any further colors or mediums, I'll be able to do so without changing the colors I have now. Now I'm going to use Butternut Radiant Rain's Spray Mist to add a bit of warmth to the entire background of the canvas. After I get the color down on the canvas, then I'll use a paintbrush to spread the paint around, and then I'll use a damp baby wipe to remove some of the excess. I'm going to age the frame with China Black Primary Elements, and after I get it brushed on, I will lightly mist it with more water so it will run down into the crevices. Then I will take a damp baby wipe to remove the excess from the surface of the frame pieces. Next, I'm going to make some flower centers by dotting the gold texture gems paint in the center of each flower. This will add a nice detail. I love the way pink and gold look together, so I'm going to spread some aged brass metallic wax randomly over the entire canvas background with my finger. I'll mostly be concentrating on the high spots to bring out the texture in the background. You'll need to carry that gold look around to the sides as well. One last detail I need to take care of, and that is to fill the nest with a tiny bit of moss. This way it will have a more finished look. You just know people are going to look inside. Once I figured out how much I needed, I put a large dollop of glue inside the nest and stuck the moss down in there. And now your canvas is ready for hanging. For more inspiration, you can find me on these social media links. If you enjoyed today's project video, please give me a thumbs up, and I hope you will consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, and always take time to play.